Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Shots Fired podcast. I'm Mark Redlich.
And I'm Kyle Schoberg, and today we're going to be talking about all things officer-involved shootings.
At the end of this, you might decide not to watch your body camera if you've been involved in an officer-involved shooting.
Hey, 4-9, shots fired.
Copy, additional shot fired.
Shots fired, shots fired. Shooting at us.
Suspect shooting an officer.
Suspect down. He's at the base of the stairs, white t-shirt, white male.
All right, everybody. Today we have James Tacchini in studio with us with Savage Training Group. James, thank you for taking the time to drive all the way down here, be on the show. We really appreciate it, man.
Hey, this is awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, dude. Hey, give everybody a little bit of a bio about yourself. We're not going to discuss where you work, but maybe a location here in California and some of the stuff that you do that is going to kick this show off.
Sure. Big Northern California agency. Been in law enforcement since about 2007. First 10 years I spent all on patrol and doing undercover work. And in 2017 got promoted to sergeant. And also in 2017, I became a hostage negotiator or a crisis negotiator. So did that. And then in 2018, I got recruited to do officer involved shooting investigations. So I think they kind of picked me because my expertise. I was teaching at the academy for about 8 years prior to that, talking about use of force incidents and putting cops through scenarios. So those two things I think are probably the most fun I've had doing in my career is negotiations, because it's fun just talking to people. And it's kind of like a challenge trying to get people to do what you want them to do, you know, and something that they don't necessarily want to do. So that's a lot of fun. And then I just get a thrill out of investigating officer involved shootings, talking to cops, because I've learned cops do the right thing like 99.9% of the time. It's just trying to get that information out of them to explain why they did what they did, and as it relates to policies and laws that we have.
Yeah. And I think a lot of cops that get involved in officer involved shootings honestly have no clue what the next steps are going to be following the shooting. And you get totally taken off guard when it's like, okay, the shooting occurred and it's like, holy shit, now what is next? You know, and that's terrifying when you're involved in the situation. So we're going to cover all that for you guys today. You mentioned that you were a hostage negotiator. How many teams do you guys have? What is your average call outs? And I think we need to kind of dabble into that a little bit because the communication piece is big. I don't think a lot of cops out there truly know how to communicate properly with people, which can ultimately lead into an officer involved shooting potentially. Yeah. So I think it's important that we touch on that, and then we'll talk about the officer involved shooting investigations.
Right. So team that I'm on, we have about 40 different negotiators, divided up into four teams, and I'm a team lead on one of those teams. And I think last year, the last number that we ended up with, I think we had a call out actually on New Year's Eve, and that was the 93rd call out for the year.
Wow. Okay.
So we're averaging close to, and it's just the numbers are increasing now. I mean, the way the laws are written, we're a resource that has to be used. So
it should be used.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, the benefits of it are so great. I mean, we see positive resolutions almost half the time by our efforts, another 25% of the time, you know, just even knowing that we're kind of coming on scene, or some of the cops seeing the tactics that we use, they take some of that and they're able to remedy the situation even before we get there. So it's awesome. Just, I mean, the negotiation tactics that we're going to talk about today aren't just limited. It's not a big secret that I hold. That's why, you know, I'm here to talk about too. It's stuff that we do in everyday life. For those of you who are married out there listening, I mean, everything's a negotiation. If you got little kids, you're negotiating with them.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So it's just stuff that we do daily, but we may not recognize that this is something huge, even though it may seem so small and insignificant. No, it does have a purpose.
So you had almost 100 call outs. How big is your department? That seems like a big number to me.
We got about 1,600 cops.
Wow. All right. So even 100 call outs, that's pretty small percentage.
Right. I mean,
or is it?
You know what? So our cops are very well trained. A good majority of the department is crisis intervention trained. So again, a lot of the strategies that we use, they've broken down. They just don't have the continuous training or the updates or the legal side of it. But, as far as how to talk to somebody, I think we do a pretty good job of that. And we've really put an emphasis on it of talking and dealing with people in crisis and how to talk people down.
So let's jump into that. So let's provide the listeners the opportunity to give them the tools necessary to be able to properly communicate with somebody, maybe that they're involved in a crisis or whatever the situation is. You train with Savage Training Group, who we've had Scott on the show, and shout out to Scott for everything that, he's doing with the Savage Training Group. We pump their information out. We believe in their training. You guys as instructors are experts. What class do you teach with him? And let's kind of dive into into what you're teaching for that.
Right on. Yeah. So we do a modern crisis negotiations, me and a good buddy of mine, Donnie Anderson. And he and I are both just passionate about teaching, passionate about, just igniting a spark into people to kind of be that change that we always talk about. So he is, aside from being passionate, probably one of the smartest people I've met. He is a total case law nerd. And I say that with like the utmost respect and a huge compliment to him. So our class we talk about, we don't go into like all this, this is super advanced stuff. We just really break down the basics, because even as a negotiator myself, I teach this stuff and it's easy for me to fall back into just the bad habits. And what I see kind of time and time again, even from trained negotiators, is we automatically just want to influence people to do what we do, what we want them to do. And the best example of that is I've done it myself even, before you kind of catch yourself, is, hey, you got a person in crisis and they're holding the knife. What's the first thing the cop is going to tell that
Drop the knife.
Drop the knife. And you know what?
And they're yelling it.
They're going to yell it. And guess what the person's not going to do?
Drop the knife.
Right. So what are we going to do again?
Yell.
Yeah,
drop the
I'm gonna
knife.
Yell louder.
Yeah.
And I'm going to
that
tell them
works.
to drop the knife again. And they're still not going to drop. We're just going to keep doing the same thing. And I always say, hey, what's the definition of insanity? Who's the crazy person here? Is it us that is not
That's a good point.
moving on to something else, or is it the person in crisis? So I always tell people, it's great to throw that out there, get that point across. But if they're not doing it, all right, let's move on to something else. And one of the things that we teach, we do it all the time, but we don't recognize that we do it. And it's called the behavioral change stairway, or how to get someone to do something that you want. And part of that is influence, but it's not the first step. And people are kind of surprised to see, I teach these classes and I kind of joke around with them too. And the first day I start off, I tell them, hey, during this class, we're going to tell you that one thing that is going to get everyone to comply. This one statement, you're going to be able to have everyone to comply just by these. And people are like, oh God, what's the statement here? Yeah. I go, no, I'm just screwing with you. Cause there is no statement that I can give you, and it's mainly how you present yourself. It's your personality lumped in with a few techniques, and one of them being that stairway. So it's not so much what you say, but how you are and being able to listen. Active listening is huge. I mean, the people that we're talking with here are at the lowest they've probably ever been in their life. And they've probably been screaming for help, but no one's listened. So now this is kind of like they're at their wits' end. This is their perhaps final opportunity to have someone listen. So just showing up, hey, I'm James. I'm here to listen. What's going on today? I mean, it's huge. You may not get them right then and there, but at least it kind of shows your intention. You're doing something different than what the other cops before that have just been yelling at this guy have been doing. So that's always the first step to it. And the second step, we got to build a rapport with this person. You got to build a rapport with some sort of empathy. We try and stay away from things that like I understand, because you don't understand. I mean, two big things we see are like people in crisis are vets or people going through divorces and stuff. And hey, I may be a vet. I'm not, but my coworker or someone talking may be a vet, but do they understand what that person's going through? Same thing, getting divorced. You may have gone through a divorce, but is your divorce the same as what this person is going through? So you can't really say I understand, but you can reference, hey, I went through a divorce as well. It was terrible, but I don't know what you're going through right now. So I would love to hear what's going on, and perhaps I can provide you some resources that help me or some of my other buddies. But I'm not going to lie and say I know what you're going through right now, but I'm hoping you'll open up and tell me.
Do you think cops show up to scenes like that? Like, we'll use a guy with a knife and they just are immediately expecting a behavior change right from the get-go. So that's why cops are getting out of the car, guns drawn, yelling at people, hey, drop the knife. And we're expecting that immediate behavior change from people. And when they're not getting it, cops get stuck. Like, okay, well, they're supposed to be dropping the knife. They're not. Now their OODA loop is all jacked up. And I like that you're able to provide tools and certain steps to take so that when the person doesn't drop the knife, like, okay, well, let's move to this next step. What would be the next step after you're trying to build a rapport? Maybe you've got someone on the hook, and how are you going to continue it from there?
So I'll go back to your first question. Cops do get stuck in that cycle. And I honestly think because, 9 times out of 10, a cop tells someone to do something, they do it. So they get in that habit of, hey, I need you to sit on the curb. People do that. Yeah. Hey, I need you to turn off your engine in the car. The person does it. And then when someone goes against the grain, I don't know what to do. Usually when I tell people to do something, it's always worked before. So, let me just go back to my default setting and say it again. And that's where you got to realize that you're actually in that spiral. It's not super complex. And kind of the best way I've taught it too is I like to use analogies. This stuff isn't overly complicated. And, we're a room of guys and stuff. We've all been single at one point in our life. And I teach this point is you want to talk to a girl at a bar, right? You don't just go up to her and go, hey, I'm James. You want to come back to my place? I mean, there's a chance that might have worked. I mean, just that 1 in a million shot, but odds are.
So you're telling me there's a chance.
So you're telling me there's a chance. That's probably not going to fly.
Yeah.
So how do we talk to people? Hey, how you doing? Hey, I couldn't help notice that drink. What are you drinking there? Oh, okay. Hey, my first time here. Do you come here often? Start asking those questions, but you really want to listen. You really want to listen to what they're saying and then go off of that feedback. Find out what else they're saying. You mentioned you're going through a divorce and this is your first time out in months. I'm really sorry to hear that. That's awful. I've never been married, so I couldn't even pop, but my buddy's going through it. He says, I'm not even going to try and begin to, but I mean, I hope I'm not prying here, but if you want to talk about it, I could be a set of ears right now. It's up to them. You've given them a choice to whether to talk about it, to build that rapport. You're at least offering that. 9 times out of 10, they're going to talk to you. It may not be right then and there, but at least you put yourself out there. You've opened up. You've shown that empathy to where you're allowing this person to engage further. You're showing that active listening skill that you have that you can display there. Go ahead.
You mentioned active listening, but also the communication piece. Communication is kind of a lost art at this point in time. You look at patrol officers, they're 2, 3, 4 years on. In my experience is some of the best negotiators and the best talkers are the officers that have worked patrol for 20 years. They are slower. They're more advanced in any type of communication, but communication is lost, and it starts with cell phones and text messaging. Communication is just different. You can do that. You want immediate gratification, and these newer cops are on the street and they want something immediately. So getting there and taking the time to build that rapport is huge, because that's ultimately what de-escalation is. That's building a rapport.
Right. And you know what? I always kind of challenge that too, because I've seen younger cops do it. You just have to bring it out. You have to give them some sort of incentive that it works for you. And I'll even argue and say some of the best negotiations I've seen are from the 1 and 2 year cops, but it's when it benefits them. And the classic story I say, and I used to get complaints when on the street saying, hey, your cop came to my scene. They said something about it was being the end of their shift. And I called them because I needed a burglary report done. Well, after talking to the cop for 10 minutes, I didn't want that report done anymore. They were able to Jedi mind trick me into not wanting that report and to go online and do it. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, I didn't get what I needed. So you see these young cops go out there and they don't want to take a report because it's time to go. So they're like, hey, it's going to take a while for me to get you this report. You're going to have to wait 10 days for a case number. Hey, you know what would be beneficial to you? Just go online and do it right now. You can print it out. You can fax it over or email it to your insurance company right there. And the person's like, yeah, that's really cool. I'm going to do that. Thank you, officer. And that person was able to negotiate, not taking that paper report, make the person happy, or at least think that they're happy. So, I mean, I think that they do have the ability, but we got to incentivize this younger generation on, hey, what's in it for you? And the big thing I say too is if you're able to negotiate, you don't have to fight. This person is going to remember you. This person just doesn't remember you, but they remember the uniform and how you treated them and that you were empathetic. And you might have been the only person in their life or the recent history that actually treated them like a human being.
Yeah, that's true. And the whole report taking thing, you're totally right. I mean, I didn't even think about that, but a lot of cops do that. And there's people listening to this right now that are laughing because they do it.
Right.
You know? But
I've been one of them too.
Yeah, I think we all probably have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do agree with you that I think with the younger generation, with what Mark is saying, you're right. There has to be some type of incentive for them to want to do that, to get that gratification out of it. But so going back to the communication piece, and then we're going to roll into the officer involved shooting stuff, because I think these kind of tie into each other. What's next in your guys' class that you can provide the viewer or the listener some tips on building that rapport, getting people to do what they want them to do? How does that look? You started with the 5-step program. Can you kind of build on that?
So yeah, after you got rapport, empathy, you get active listening. Those are kind of in any order. I like to start with the active listening. Then you start moving on to the influence. Hey, now that we've got rapport, now I can start getting you to do what I want, or at least throwing it out there. One of the things I like to do as well, that's kind of a cool trick, is give people a choice, or at least the illusion of a choice, because people feel cornered. I mean, they know what's going to happen here. But if you kind of let them know, hey, a 5150, for example, a person experiencing a mental health crisis, I have to take you to the hospital. But how would you like to go? We've kind of got a good thing going right now. Do you want me to drive you, or do you want an ambulance? And I've learned that means so much to the person, because they feel like they're out of control. Now they're dealing with the cops that are typically in control of the scene. Just giving them that little bit of choice makes a huge difference. After you got the influence to get them to do what they do, then you have the behavior change. You've pretty much got them. And I think where a lot of cops stop is, hey, the guy's in handcuffs. Perfect. Well, no, why don't we go above and beyond? Because in police work, we sometimes see the repeat customers out there. And what our team has started to do is we've started debriefing the custodies or the person in crisis. And we talk to them too. Go, hey, what happened? You hated my guts at first. And after, an hour and a half, we got a connection here. What changed? And it's fine. I mean, sometimes it's the most simplest thing that you did that caused him to cooperate. And it's just, I would have never thought about that in a million years. Something where I'm thinking in my mind where I'm going strong in a different direction. It was, no, you offered me water and I was really thirsty.
I like to debrief because that is geniusly obvious, because you're right. You build all this rapport, all this trust. You got all these cops out there, and then you're trying to, in a way, manipulate somebody to do what you want. They come out, you put them in handcuffs, and you're like, all right, I'm done. And then you leave, and then they're just like, oh my God, why did I even listen to them? And then next time you come out, they're like, I am not doing that. But you debrief them, you treat them right. The next time they're like, hey, this guy was honest. I like that. That's huge.
And that's where I try and incentivize the younger cops too. It's like, hey, do you really want to come back to this house over and over again? Or, can we treat this person humanely, do it the right way once, and hopefully we won't have to do it again. Find them the resources, help them out. They're calling for help for a reason. And the other thing I'll throw out there too is don't make promises that you can't keep. It's the simplest things that I've learned that matter the most. Hey, you know what? You told me you get me a McDonald's. Can we stop off and you get me a hamburger on the way there? Or I'm thirsty. Just that bottle of water means everything, versus if we do happen to see him again, well, they just lied. They lied to me to get me in handcuffs. Why would I trust not just you, but you guys all wear the uniform? You all must be liars.
Well, that's setting the next officer up for success. One of my favorite sergeants always said that. He's like, hey, as soon as you're off shift, the next cop's going to go to that house. So set them up for success.
Right.
Yeah. Success or failure, depending on how you treat that person.
Yeah. So, the incentive for us is, obviously to help the person. I think that's where the rapport and empathy comes in. But also, we're selfish too. We don't want to have to keep coming back out to the same resident. We want to, let's do it right the first time.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it incentivizes things for us, as well as the fact that, hey, I'm going to treat this person like a human being. They're hopefully not going to want to fight or resist arrest. And, and no cop goes out there thinking, oh, I hope we get into a fight. Oh, I hope we get into a shooting today. That's not anyone's goal or mindset out there. That's always a last resort. So I'd say that's the incentive right there, is not having to use force, especially in today's day and age.
How much time should the officer be investing in each step along the way? I mean, when, okay, clearly something's not working. How long are we waiting until, all right, let's bump this up to the next step?
Yeah. You know what? I wish I had an answer for that. Sometimes It's been to where I show up on scene. One guy told me, I just showed up on scene. I'm like, hey, before I could even introduce myself, he's all, I don't like your sideburns. You remind me of someone who I hate. I'm like, so I just did a quick U-turn.
Like,
okay, I'm out of here. Good luck, man. I'm tapping out.
That is some solid discipline, though, on your part. You recognize, hey, I'm not going to work in this. The 13 other call-outs I was on, I was the number one point guy, but this one, I'm not going to do it. I'm out. That's discipline.
Right. And I think it's, too, you got to put and this is where kind of the separation is in the training. You do this more often than just patrol officers. You put the ego aside. And it's not, no, I'm the cops. You're going to talk to me. And my sideburns rule, by the way.
Yeah. They're pretty nice, dude.
Yeah. How dare you?
Yeah.
So it's all right. Well, hey, the goal is not to trigger people. It's not an escalation thing. It's a de-escalation. So is me being here an escalative factor? And if so, I got to tap out. Yeah. As much as I may be able to contribute, there's some stuff behind the scenes I can do. I can do coaching. And that's where we need to just, one of the best advice I've gotten for negotiations, even before going into it, is make sure yourself is de-escalated. Make sure you're calm, cool, collective, and able to actually do this before going in and trying to help someone else.
Yeah, that's huge too. And that's self-awareness and how to, I guess in a way, like measuring, are you effective? Because you have to evaluate yourself if what you're doing isn't working, and you have to recognize like, hey, what I'm doing isn't working, and that's being self-aware. And a lot of people can get in that OODA loop.
Right. So, kind of long answer to a short question here. There is really no times. There's been times where we just can't get through to a person. And what we look at now is, 15, 16, 17 years ago, we didn't walk up. We're the police. We're here. We're going to end it. You're coming with us. You're going to go in custody. It's a complete 180 now. It's all right. Is it worth it? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Is us being here going to do more help or more harm to the person? So sometimes if we can't get over the first, we'll listen. They might just be yelling at us and hate us, but there's no rapport. We'll evaluate what the crime is. Is there a crime? That's the big question that needs to be asked too. Do we have a crime? And we might just walk away.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are starting to adopt that philosophy. And if you're not walking away, or let's say you are walking away and a crime has been committed, there are other tactics out there to get people into custody without having to really escalate the situation that's going on right now. A lot of departments are doing pickaways,
right?
Wait it out. But for the SWAT people out there, I know it can be frustrating, being on a SWAT call out. We'll use that as an example. And the negotiators are communicating with, we'll say the suspect. You don't know as the SWAT guy what the conversations are being had between the negotiator and the bad guy. And if a rapport is being made, maybe it takes a long time and it can be frustrating, but we're not hearing that conversation. So it sounds to me like the biggest thing is if you're hearing or getting some type of behavior change from that person, you're going to keep that going. Right. So I know a lot of guys are like, all right, we've been out here for 4 hours. Let's gas this place, Well, maybe you guys as the negotiator have built some type of rapport with this person, and you're building those building blocks to get him to just surrender on their own. I think it's important that cops and SWAT guys recognize that and give you guys the benefit of the doubt. And if it's not working and the person's just not going to comply with what you're asking them to do, and you're not getting that behavior change, okay, well then maybe we ramp it up, and maybe it's time to gas the house or whatever. But
but I think part of that though is the communication between negotiations, SWAT, and the perimeter units. And I think the negotiation teams need to really communicate with everybody like, hey, this is step by step our progress, because being on a call outs before, you're sitting there like, what is going on? And we're like asking, and no one's giving us updates. And that's where the frustration comes in. And we're like, why are these negotiators not what's going on? So I think if negotiations could really provide solid updates, even for perimeter units that are sitting in their cars, to really keep them up to date.
Yeah, if you're sitting there and wherever you are, maybe freaking stacked up on a Bearcat or something, and you're at least getting updates like from you guys or the negotiators. Hey, we got him on the phone. We're building a rapport. He's thinking about surrendering. He wants some cigarettes or whatever. Like, all right, cool. At least we know where we kind of stand with what's going on. But when you don't know, it does become frustrating. So, I don't think I've given that a whole lot of thought until just within this 10 minutes of talking to you, but that is a real thing. And you guys have your job, and that is really getting those people kind of sucked into you to get them to do what you want. So I don't know. I think people need to.
Well, you guys hit it on the head, and my agency does a really good job. And the proof, I mean, I always say, hey, how do you know something works is when you can look at our use of force and it's decreased year after year. You know, the more cases, the more call outs are going up, but the use of force is going down. The officer involved shootings are going down. And when I first started, it was, you know, you said it, hey, patrol's doing their thing, SWAT's doing their thing, and negotiators are doing their thing, and no one knows what's going on. And we're just hoping for a peaceful resolution. Yeah. And now we recognize, okay, this is a problem. We're all a team here. And what I'll do as a team lead is I will actually sit with the SWAT commander and explain what's going on, get feedback, and find out what their plan is. And a lot of times they're like, you're running the show right now. You and your guys, you and your team, they're running it right now. What's the rush? Yeah. I mean, you got to really ask yourself, what's the rush there? So people think, oh, communication's huge with just the person in crisis or the suspect, whoever it is. Communication, I would argue, is almost more important amongst ourselves and letting those different teams or resources out there know what's going on. And hey, do we have a plan here? You know, what is the plan here? What's our primary plan? Do we have an alternative contingency? You know, and discussing these things, because you have wealths of knowledge out there. And just say, oh, negotiators are going to do it all and be able to get this guy. No, that's not always the case. We may need to go tactical on this, but how can we minimize that? Yeah. So how about, and maybe, hey, listen, maybe some of you out there are doing this already, and that's fantastic, but integrating somebody from the negotiation team at the command post, like you said, and that communication is instant. It's right there. They know exactly what's going on and can communicate that to the tactical team or the perimeter guys or whatever. But I don't know. I personally see sometimes that lack of communication being there, like he said, and it could be frustrating for everybody else, because I think sometimes the negotiators are in their own little world. So I don't know. I like it.
You have positions for virtually everything. You have someone that's watching a window. You have someone that's on the robot. You have someone that's on the radio. You have someone that's voice. You have someone non-lethal. You have lethal. You have all these positions. Designate a position of someone that's going to communicate between the two. Implement it. Yeah, a liaison is great. Yeah. I mean, and it works both ways. Hey, we're letting the team know, hey, it's even great just letting our team members know, negotiators, when you're there and you're thinking you're not getting anywhere, just hearing that, hey, TAC thinks you're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. They're getting reads on this guy. You know, we're watching his body movement, his behaviors out there, and just kind of building your teammates up after they've been doing this for 3, 4, 5 hours at a time too. Yeah. Well, how often our SWAT team's training with the negotiators? I know, like, at least in my department, they'll do combined training days together. But would you say it's fair to say, I mean, Mark, we're on a full-time SWAT team. It was minimal when I was there, but looking back, why not integrate it? Right. Like, that's a team. It's a full team. It's a full effort. Yeah, it's changed so much. I mean, what blows my mind is just how much things have changed in such a short period of time. It's just, hey, we're going this guy doesn't want to listen. We're going tactical right now, and we're just going to bust through the door and see what happens. And we've literally pulled back and polar opposite now. Right, we're walking away. I mean, if you would have told me that 15 years ago, no, that's never going to happen. Yeah, and now it's a resource. You know, disengagement is a resource that a lot of agencies have in their policies now. Yeah. So let me ask you this. Since you run a negotiation team, how often have you invited like the SWAT team or patrol guys to come and watch your training? So patrol and SWAT knows what you guys do. Right. Not as much as I would like. You know, we probably do it twice, maybe 3 times a year. What I will say is probably the benefit of, having 93 call outs a year is a lot of time they're on scene there with us. And it's a good time to, it's the heat of the moment. But at the same time,
if there's not exigency, hey, we're having those conversations. We're learning from them. They're learning from us. And at the end of every situation, we do a debrief with each other as well. And it's not just, hey, negotiators are doing their debrief, SWAT's doing theirs. No, hey, what worked for you guys? What didn't you like? And I've been called out before. Yeah, I did something stupid and, something I didn't realize it, but I don't know their training either. So it's something that we learn from, and having those uncomfortable conversations or debriefs are absolutely necessary, because had I not known, I would have done the exact same thing again.
Yeah.
And same thing for relaying, hey, why do we do something that we do on their end?
Yeah. Wow. Communication is so big in law enforcement. Now, if you do get into a shooting, and we're going to roll into that next.
Yeah.
You got to explain, you're going to be asked those questions in your interview, like what led up to the shooting, right? What conversations were being had? It's going to probably be on body cam. People are going to watch and listen to it. Communication is so big, and it's so it's undertrained. I don't even think we were taught communication in the academy.
Zero.
Right.
I remember the first time on patrol, didn't even know how a radio worked or how to even communicate on it. Yeah.
It's something, something unique, I think, that we do on this show is we really try to weed out the roboticness of the young cops, right? That is something we do talk about a lot on this show, is if you are a young cop out there, don't be so robotic, just be you, be a human being. People want to interact with just a normal human being on calls. So this has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, it was great.
You said it too. It's so funny, especially 5150 calls. What I've learned is cops don't like telling people what's going to happen. The person's asking, hey, if I come with you, what's going to happen to me? And we all know the answer. They're going to go to the hospital, probably for a 72-hour hold or less, depending upon what's going on there. But cops can't just say that. The guy will ask, hey, am I under arrest? Well, I know. They stand around. And why not just say, here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to the hospital. I'm either going to drive you or an ambulance is. You're going to go there. A doctor's going to talk to you. You might get some meds. You're probably going to get a sandwich and a juice. You can be there about 72 hours, depending upon what's going on. Probably no more. I don't know for certain, and I'm just telling you that. But that's kind of what we have to deal with here. Does that sound good? But cops dance around it, and in the way that they're dancing around it makes the person uncertain. Well, why is this guy not sharing with me what's going to happen to me? What are they going to do to me?
They're just pure fear.
Absolutely. And we're only giving into it more by, they might be paranoid or delusional. And by us not being direct with them, we're staring
Their brains
right into
are going to
that.
start going off. Yeah. Wondering.
Yeah, these cops are going to kill me. It's not unheard of to think of, of what they're I couldn't even fathom what they're possibly thinking of is why we're hiding something, or it appears to be that we're hiding something.
Yeah, and sometimes you do have to tell someone, hey, am I going to be going to jail? Yeah, you are. You are under arrest. You are going to jail, because that might lead into maybe a use of force or something greater. And you can say and articulate, I told him, he knew he was under arrest. There was no hiding it, no denying it. They knew they were under arrest. That's important. Yeah, I don't understand why there is no reason to dance around it. Just be honest.
All right, James, thanks. That was a great segment. We really talked a lot about communication in a form of de-escalation, and really how to get people to do what you want them to do through negotiations, and the multiple steps that you provided was really good. It's really having the ability to be flexible, build that rapport, recognize if you're doing something that's working or not. And then as you progress through that, really being open. And I think the most important of that segment was the debrief after somebody's in custody or they've resolved or surrendered, that they actually, and you take the time to explain to them what happened, and you do have a lot to learn from that. So that was a great segment on communication in negotiations. Thank you.
Hey, so we're going to jump into the officer-involved shooting investigations, which is the bulk of this conversation and why we have you here today. And I'm excited to do that. But before we do, we want to give Arrest My Vest a big thank you for sending us their product, hooking us up. Guys, it is almost summertime. You're going to be smelly. Your vests are going to stink. Head over to arrestmyvest.com. Get yourselves a bottle of their product. It's the #1 deodorizing product out there on the market for police, Kevlar vest, you name it, boots, your patrol car. 2 sprays of this, you guys are golden. So head over to arrestmyvest.com, pick yourself up some product. All right, let's talk about officer-involved shootings. We're all pretty passionate about it. Mark and I have been involved in several officer-involved shootings. James, you teach the officer-involved shooting investigations. You're part of a team that investigates officer involved shootings. How many roughly a year do you guys average? And let's dive into this, because it is sad to say that, I mentioned it before, most cops that get into a shooting have no clue what they're in store for next.
Right. And kind of parlaying with the previous segment, why is that such a big secret as to what's going on? Why can't we tell people the process? And I think the uncertainty freaks people out. So let's kind of pull back the curtain right now and talk about what happens. It's funny. I've been doing this for roughly a little over 4 years, doing the investigation part. And I think we started off with like 9 a year, and it's just slowly come down, and knock on wood. My agency hasn't had one this year. I think last year was about 4 or 5 that we had. So, I do the administrative investigation portion of it. And typically what's funny about officer involved shooting investigations is the investigation starts immediately after that trigger's pulled. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is it's up to the supervisors and the cops on scene to know what I talk about. And I do another class through Savage with Marlon Marachi. He was on your show. Yeah. Former LAPD, another super smart dude. And we talk about how the importance of getting every step done right after that trigger has been pulled, from the public safety statement to evidence that could be fleeting, send someone in an ambulance to the hospital with the suspect if they were hit. Hey, let's locate other evidence, cameras in the area that are going to show this here. And just talking to the officer, not about necessarily what happened. In fact, you shall not talk about that. That's kind of like one of the 10 commandments of officer involved shootings, is you as a supervisor on the scene, you don't ask what happened or why did the cops shoot. And for cops listening out there, this is one of my big pet peeves. I mean, of course, check with your agency policy and stuff, but you should never be telling a supervisor or anybody except an attorney as to why you shot or what happened out there. So that's probably one of my number one big takeaways from doing this. That's the investigative process.
And I want to add one more thing to that, and that is, guys, you really got to be careful being on body camera now. I've seen it time and time again. When you get into a shooting, your buddy shows up, your adrenaline's, super high, and you're like, dude, I shot because of X. Don't do that. You're on body cam now, basically giving your own statement as to why you shot. You can't do those things. You have to understand you're being recorded from God knows where, probably video surveillance, your partner's body camera, your own body camera footage. As hard as it is to do, you got to be cognizant of that, and you got to not talk about it.
There's in having somebody that knows that, you're going to get into it, but when I was on the SWAT team, my partner was involved in a shooting, and another guy on the team, he's since promoted, and he's a major mentor of mine. He's now the lieutenant of the SWAT team. As soon as that happened, he was like, his priority, once everything was kind of safe, but he was free, and he went immediately to him and talked to him and said, and basically took control of that officer and was like, do not talk, immediately manage that. And I was absolutely impressed by that, because you're like, that officer's just been involved in a shooting. They're going to maybe talk, and he controlled that and really ultimately, helps him, so having someone that knows that is huge.
Yeah. And I don't want to go too deep into a rabbit hole on this, because I want to continue this, but the natural thing to want to do when you just got done being involved in something like that is you want to say what happened, right? You just use the utmost authority that you're given of potentially taking somebody's life. Like, you want to tell somebody why you did that. You want to justify your own actions to somebody. And it sounds harsh, and it may sound bad, when you have a guy like that showing up that's telling you to clam up, basically, not talk. That is pretty frightening to somebody to be told that, because you feel you did nothing wrong. But at the end of the day, it's only to protect yourself. And that time will come when you get to share your story, but that is not the time to do it. So I just wanted to double down on that real quick, because the body camera thing, I think, is getting, I don't want to say got people in trouble, but I see cops getting wrapped up in probably forgetting that it's there and it's on. And then they start sharing to other people what happened, and boom, next thing you know, it's out there. So go ahead and continue with what you were saying.
Right. No, just to even touch on that. You've got big agencies here in California where we've all seen in the news where cops have been booked. This is unheard of, where you have cops that have gotten involved in shootings and are now facing criminal charges. And when you give that statement on body worn camera, it's human nature. You brought up, I'm looking for that reassurance as to what I did. Mm-hmm. But once you say that, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. It is out there. and it's out there for everybody. I mean, the DA's office, whoever's prosecuting, the DOJ, they're going to be looking at that first initial statement that you made while you shot. So a lot of agencies have the policy, hey, after it's done, the camera goes off. My camera's off. We're removing you from everyone else, and we're going to do the public safety statement over there. And I don't want to hear why you shot, and I'm not going to ask what happened. It's just that simple. And then again, for people listening, if your agency doesn't have a policy on it, I'm not saying it's the right way, but it's a way that I've seen work a lot. Of course, defer to your agency, but maybe get something in the books that says, cameras should be off during the public safety statements on that.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And just explain to everybody what a public safety statement is, because a lot of people, classes that I've taught about officer-involved shootings, a lot of cops don't even know what the public safety statement is. Right. So, I mean, it typically addresses, it's just talking about any witnesses, any injured parties, any evidence out there. So it will go somewhere along the lines of, I would start off, it's not written on there, but ask the cop, hey, are you okay? Are you injured? Your adrenaline's going, you're going through the most traumatic event you've ever been through in your life. Are you okay? Physically, are you shot? And I've even done it where, or seen it where it happens where a sergeant physically inspects the cop because it's nighttime out, looking for holes that shouldn't be there. After that, did you fire your weapon? What direction did you fire? Were you shot at? How many suspects? What direction did they go? Any weapons involved? Where are they? Any other evidence that I should be made aware of? Something like that. And then any witnesses that may have seen this. So it is just that. It's a statement to address public safety. We're accountable for all the rounds that we fire. We want to make sure that if they went in that house over there, we check and make sure that we didn't hit the wrong person. Same thing goes with the bad guy that was shooting at us. Hey, let's check that direction and make sure there were no unintended targets. Yeah. And anything outside of that, if somebody's asking you that, that's the time to hopefully know or understand what's going on and say, hey, with all due respect, I'm not going to answer those questions outside that public safety statement. Your supervisor shouldn't be asking you anything outside of that, and no officer, nobody else should be asking you anything outside of that. So it's important that if people do, hey, with all due respect, I'm going to wait until I get my representation and then go from there. But let's talk about next. And I know every agency is different, and we are going to talk about some of the horror stories I think that we've heard and maybe have seen happen to officers who have been in shootings, and what agencies have done with them immediately following that. But in theory, that officer should be sequestered, partnered up maybe with somebody, walk everybody through what happens next in the investigation part of it. Right. So, I mean, after you get the public safety statement, the cop can remain on scene, but once you get all the information, they should be taken out. They should not be disarmed. They should, and this is, I'm not a lawyer. This is just me doing these investigations, kind of seeing what's best practice. And you guys brought it up here in the horror stories out there. There should be a process for I'm not going to say disarming, but a gun swap. Hey, we're going to use, your gun is now evidence. We're going to take that one, but immediately give you a brand new gun. All right. We're not disarming, because cops, what's the first thing that goes through our mind when we hear disarming? Oh, you did something wrong. You're losing your gun and badge right now because you did something wrong. And what kind of a mental mind trick does that do to the cop? Just taking away their gun right there. After that was a tool that potentially saved their life or stopped an active shooter or saved other people's lives. We're going to now take away that instrument from you. So that should not happen. People say, oh, they shouldn't use their phone. I disagree. Use your phone, call your loved ones. If I'm involved in a shooting, I'm going to call my loved one. I'm not going to tell them what happened, but they're going to want to hear from my voice. They're not going to want to hear from my sergeant or anyone, because they're not going to believe it. They're going to want to hear from me that I'm okay. Hey, I was just involved in an incident. You may see it on the news. I am okay. I'm going to be busy. I'm going to be late tonight, but I'm okay. Give that reassurance. And supervisors out there, allow your officers to use that phone to make a phone call. Yeah. You should encourage it. Totally. I mean, I think you should encourage it. I wouldn't text, stay away from social media. I mean, a lot of this comes down to common sense. You're not putting Facebook posts up there or, texting about anything. Yeah.
but do it old school. Use a station phone and make phone calls as to what's good, as to the fact that you're okay.
Yeah.
And no spouse wants a phone call from anybody other than you.
Right.
No management should be contacting, because that is the worst fear, is that supervisor calls and you immediately think the worst.
Yeah. And I'll tell you a horror story that I heard recently from teaching one of these classes is, if you're in an officer involved shooting, you're a victim. I mean, I said, this is the most
yes, you are.
This
Yes.
is the most traumatic thing you'll probably ever go through in your life. And it just doesn't end after that trigger's pulled. It doesn't end after the investigation. This stays with you. I've had friends that have gone to therapy and that are still in therapy decades later afterward. This stays with you for the rest of your life. So how we treat these people is a big catalyst to what's going to happen the rest. So I heard a horror story where a cop got into an officer involved shooting. That cop stripped of their gun belt right away. Then they were placed in the back seat of a patrol vehicle.
God.
Driven to the station. They didn't have a room that locked, aside from a cell. So thank God they didn't put them in a cell. But they basically put them in a room, stripped them of their cell phones, and they were ordered to stay there without any contact from anyone, no buddy officer, and not make any notification for hours.
So basically he was placed under arrest.
Exactly.
I mean, really, why would you do that to somebody?
I heard that and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And you can't tell me that didn't affect the cop afterward.
100% it would.
No amount of, I'm sorry, I didn't know. And sorry, I'm incompetent. And that's why I did it.
Yeah.
So this is where we pull back the curtain a little bit. And, I hope people listening out there can learn from others' mistakes from this. I mean, these are just kind of big no-nos, despite, just common sense goes a long way in this sort of thing.
That's crazy. I mean, gosh, I wouldn't be surprised if that cop probably ever went back to work again. Who's going to want to be involved in something like that?
Right.
And get treated like that.
Wow.
I just want to offer a couple tips out there. And again, it goes back to your department policy and best practice. But what I've seen that works, all of us have obviously been around enough officer involved shootings and have seen what works, what doesn't work. I like the system of gun swap, gun for gun, okay? And then taking that guy or a gal back to the police department, giving them a buddy to hang out with another officer of their choosing. I've seen it where they assign an officer to hang out with that person and those two people in particular didn't get along. Probably not a good idea. Let the officer choose who they want to hang out with. There's no harm or foul in that, providing they're not having conversations about the actual shooting itself, but let them choose who they want to chill out with. Once they get taken back to the police department, they get buddied up with somebody. Let's talk about next. What is the process going to look like for them following that?
Well, I just want to make it, everything you said is exactly how it should be done. That's it right there. You take care of the cop. And the next process typically is going to be a criminal interview, whether it's done by, some larger agencies have a homicide unit that'll do it. Typically what we're seeing now is the DA's office. The district attorney runs lead on the criminal portion of it. So people are, and I like to reiterate this, you don't have to talk to the DA's office. You do not have to give a criminal statement. I love the fact that you guys have an American flag back here, because this is literally what I show up in one of my classes. Hey, you're an American. You have the right to the Fifth Amendment here. You do not have to incriminate yourself by giving a statement. No one is going to force you to. So cops need to know that. There's a lot of, you'd be surprised how many cops think, I have to give a statement. No, you don't. Yeah. And if you choose to give a statement, you run that show. Mm-hmm. You do the interview when you want to do it. Within reason, you can't, I'm seeing 2026, typically, people ask my opinion all the time. Well, when should the interview be done? And I can tell you the industry norm, but me being a human, when you're ready to give that interview.
Yeah.
When you feel that you're ready to do it. Sometimes you're ready to do it that night. Sometimes you want 2 to 3 sleep cycles. It's a subjective answer. But when you do, or if you do, realize that you are giving a statement to someone that is investigating you criminally. I know that sounds kind of common sense here, but what you say can be used against you in that. So make sure you have an attorney present there. If you don't like a question that's being asked, don't answer it. If you don't like the direction the interview is going, Stop answering questions and leave. You have the right to terminate it at any point in time. The best advice that I'll give you guys and the listeners out there is, I mean, you just look at some agencies in California where they've booked cops. If you're going to give a criminal interview, know what the hell you're talking about. And the best way to do that is to educate yourself. Read the penal code, read 835A, read justifiable homicide. How does that relate to 835A? Me personally, after going through this, one thing, if I ever get into an officer-involved shooting, I am taking 3 days and I am recapping that incident in my head over and over and over again. I'm opening up 835A, our use of force policy, and I'm writing out how everything I did, every single movement applies to that law. And if I didn't do something, why I did not do a certain thing. Was it my fault or the subject's fault that I wasn't able to do certain things in this? And I am going to paint a picture, and I'm going to be there in an hour. My philosophy is, if I'm in for a penny, I'm in for a pound. If I'm going to give an interview, I'm going to be there probably 6 hours. You remember in the Goonies when Chunk is spilling his guts and everything? And in third grade, I'm just going to start talking. I'm not going to be able to shut up because I want to make sure every aspect is covered. So when this does go to the DA's office, and if they potentially look at charging me, he covered everything. He covered absolutely everything. In fact, our interviewers didn't even need to ask questions because this guy wouldn't shut up the whole time. He just read off of the penal code what he did and why he did it and how it related, or why he didn't do something, which is sometimes more important.
Yeah, you said it. So that's why it's called a voluntary statement. You're giving
Correct.
a voluntary statement. You can withdraw that at any time. Now, real quick, Mark, you had the experience of having to do your interview the day of, and that was because that was your department policy, or is that just when they wanted to do it? I don't remember.
Yeah, that was just
like, hey, let's just do it tonight.
That's what the department did. And
so I want to touch on that real quick. You talked about it. I personally, I don't like it. I don't like I don't even like giving the officer the opportunity to do it that night. And the reason I say that is because you're just not going to recall everything that happened leading up to that event. Your brain blocks, certain things out. There's a whole critical stress amnesia, and you're just not going to remember everything. And I remember in one of my shootings, there was a guy just to the left of me over my shoulder. And at the end of this, like, who fired their guns? And it was me and one other guy and this other guy. So 3 of us raised our hand. And I look back and I'm like, holy shit, you fired your gun? And he's like, yeah, I was right behind you. Dude, I had no idea. I didn't even know that he was standing there. So because my brain didn't care that Nick was standing there behind me, right? Because I'm focused on the guy with the gun. And I say that because I've heard so many stories of cops that have been involved in these shootings, and they're tired, they're fatigued. Mark's scenario, same thing. You're there for hours and then they're like, all right, now we're going to go roll into this interview that is probably going to take at least a couple, 3-4 hours. You're mentally just flat out exhausted and drained. And for you to be giving your statement as to why you use deadly force, I mean, that's the one time that you get to do that. I personally try to tell cops, hey, unless your agency for whatever reason is making you give that statement that night, sleep on it for a couple days, give your brain the opportunity to get that REM sleep. You're going to start to remember more and more things after the fact. And me personally, I always remember that anytime after I was in a shooting, I would start to recount like more and more stuff like within 2 or 3 days after the fact that I didn't even remember the day of. And I know most people think, well, it just happened, so I'm going to be able to remember everything. And that's just false. And there's science behind that. That could be a whole other episode. But I would encourage you, hold off on the interview, give it 2-3 days, talk to your administration about it. If you're willing to give a voluntary statement, tell them, I'm going to give you guys a voluntary statement. Give me a couple days. I mean, your attorney should back your play on that.
I want to add a little more to
that's my thought on it.
A little more to that, because I did mine statement. I was up for like 18 hours wearing a uniform before I gave mine. But I like everything that you say and I agree with it. And then I can even add more to that, because I was in a uniform for like almost 18 hours. It's hot. I'm tired of wearing it. It's very uncomfortable. I'm trying to deal with that, process mentally of what's happening. My loved ones are confused. I'm not in contact with them. Like, I'm trying to process like what they're dealing with, the hunger part. Like, yeah, you're hungry, but you can't eat. People are asking you questions. And it's not just like in your entire world could come to an end. You could be arrested. You could lose your freedom
based on what you
say on that. And people are taking, they take your gun, they count your rounds in front, your attorney's there, people are coming checking on you. There's way more going on outside of your freedom, because depends on the shoot, and what you say affects everything. So I think if looking back, I would say, absolutely, I'm not doing it tonight. I'll come in the morning when I'm showered, when I'm clean, I'm like a little more aware of what's happening. I have comfortable clothing on, and I feel like I'm in control, because I felt like I had zero control.
Yeah. And unfortunately that we hear that all too often. I mean, why is it that if I'm going for promotional, my boss, my lieutenant's going to say, hey, why don't you take a few days off to prep for your promotional interview?
Yeah.
But when I'm in an OIS where I'm fighting for my freedom, as you said, now you're going to be up for 18 hours. You're going to be stressed about your family. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to be hungry. You're going to be thirsty. But hey, good luck in there.
Yeah.
Oh, and then you're talking with your attorney, and they're telling you best case scenarios, worst case scenarios.
Right.
Like, this is the process. And you're like, oh my God. Like, okay, so, and then, I mean, I can't even express everything. Like, there's a lot of fear in it. Even though it's 100%, 100% everything is fine. It's absolutely justified all the way across the board. There's still tons of fear.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you're being investigated. If the person ends up dying, you're being investigated for a homicide. That's the criminal part of it. So I know we kind of derailed on that a little bit. I just wanted to touch on that because it is important. And time and time again, I talk to guys who are like, yeah, our department just does it the day of. And I really wish we could get away with that. That's my 2 cents on it.
Right. And I tell people all the time, we cops love to complain, be the change. I mean, this is something that you can actually point to where we're going away from. This is the old school thing 15 years ago. Hey, science doesn't back it up anymore. You did an 18-hour shift, give them a few sleep cycles, because now you gave a statement and you even said it. You started remembering stuff later. Mm-hmm. Oh, so, me, the public, I'm listening to this now. Oh, you were obviously lying about something before. Your story. So why, then it kind of, now you have to explain why your story changed, when it's like, no, this is just a human factor. This is how the brain works. So.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So what else as an investigator, like what are some of the things that you're looking for as it pertains to officer involved shootings?
So I want, like I told you, and I'm going to reiterate it again, I want the cops out there to be prepared. And I've seen interviews, I've watched interviews from other agencies where I've seen good interviews and bad ones. And it's funny, one interview I got to watch from another agency, these cops gave a voluntary statement and they were on it. I mean, they were shutting down the district attorney investigator. They're going, no, I did this for this reason. Here's the subsection of 835A and whatnot. They were just putting them in their place. They were taking the wind out of their sail if they were trying to go a different direction than they wanted. And those cops, I talked to them later on, they said that the DA declined to file charges, gave them like the quickest declination letter ever within like a month and a half after the shooting, which is, I mean, in some agencies, it can be 4 years, 5 years while they still let it toll. So, I mean, to have that in a month and a half, I mean, that's closed out. It's done. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of move on with your life. So that's the importance of knowing what you're talking about.
But what do you recommend for patrol officers or anybody that could be involved in a shooting? What do you recommend to be prepared?
So stop parroting information. I hear cops all the time.
Stop parroting information, he said.
Yeah, I hear it. Oh, my sergeant told me that I can only shoot someone when it's necessary. Well, your sergeant's an idiot then in that case. And you're an idiot for believing them. There's so much more than that. Why would you not read it yourself? I've read it probably 100 times, and that's not an exaggeration, but every time I read it or even talk to other people in teaching these classes, I learn something that I'm like, how did I miss that before? And cops that, may be going to prison and losing their jobs can't read it once.
Kyle and I just recently taught a class, and for the privacy and to get actual real information, we had people close their eyes, look down so no one, it's privacy. And we asked, raise your hand if you've read the entire 835A section of the California Penal Code. What was it? 4 people out of almost...
I don't even think that many. I think maybe one guy raised his hand.
Out of about 45 people raised their hand. And then I said, okay, lower your hand. That way it's all completely controlled, neutral. And they're like, okay, look up. And it's like, that's scary.
Yeah. And we're like, hey guys, of all of you, one of you raise your hand. So yeah. And we've said it before a dozen times on the show. Like, yeah, we talk about some of the California stuff, but we know that the California laws trickle out to other states. They already have. There are plenty of other states right now that have adopted the California use of force law. And we talk about it a lot because it is so important. But as it relates to officer involved shootings, you guys should be talking to your detectives, investigators, anybody that investigates these, whether it's your homicide team. Talk to your guys and ask them like, hey, what is the process? Like, what are you guys going to do with me if I get into a shooting? You should know that before you get into the shooting, because I can honestly tell you, once that situation is done, you're going to be standing there thinking to yourself, holy fuck, did I just do that? Or did that just happen? And your brain is going to start going a million miles an hour. And it's pretty terrifying. And I'm going to admit, I didn't do my research and nobody really taught me what was going to happen next. And it completely caught me off guard. I mean, it terrified me.
What's something else that you've seen or that you would recommend or talk about as an investigator?
Like you said, ask the questions. What's the process going to be too? Because, if you truly read it, it might change your tactics ahead of time. It might prevent the officer involved shooting too. So I think the next stage in the process, if we're going down the investigative route, is if you don't just talk to the DA's office or the criminal entity investigating you, you're going to have to give a statement to the admin investigation. That's going to be compelled. Mm-hmm. So you are, and giving people a glimpse into it. There's two different parallel investigations that are going to occur. One of them is a criminal investigation and one of them is admin. And they are just that. One's looking at to see if any crime was occurred, and one of them is to see if any policy was violated in there. The information that is obtained criminally only goes to the administrative. So if you have to if you're compelled to give a statement administratively because you didn't want to talk to the crim realm, the criminal investigators don't get that. That stays within your house. They're not privy to that information because, like I said, it's a compelled interview. You're basically doing it under the threat of termination. You're going to give a statement right now. If you don't, you're going to be penalized, and it could be up to termination.
Yeah. So it's important for you guys to understand that there's two different, I don't want to say interviews, because we do the criminal side and the administration side. We do it all in one interview. We cover both. And I can explain that. But what's important for people to understand what you just said is you've got policy and you've got crime. And if you are someone that says, hey, I don't want to give my criminal statement now, I will give it in a couple of days, which that's what we're encouraging you to do. But your department turns around and says, no, you're going to provide us this administrative interview today. Otherwise you could face termination. You do have to provide that interview, providing you don't want to lose your job. And then that is going to be completely separate of the criminal investigation. That is only to determine whether or not you violated your department's policy. So I think it's important people understand that. Two different things here that we're talking about.
Correct.
Now, the way my agency does it, and it seems to work, is we give one interview. You get one interview, and you're covering the administration part and the criminal part, providing this is all voluntary. And there'll be DA investigators. The IA folks, everybody in another room. It's being live streamed over there. They're hearing the interview. You got your two detectives in the room conducting the interview, and everything is just kind of front loaded into one interview. I like it personally because I don't like the idea of calling an officer back to do two interviews. And the only reason I say that is because it kind of goes back to making someone feel like they did something wrong. And okay, you give your admin interview. All right, you're good to go. Hey, you got to come back now and give your criminal interview. To me, I don't like the thought of having somebody come back twice to give two different interviews of the same thing, if that makes sense.
Totally. You could be re-victimizing them too, as people have argued that.
Yeah. So I do recall one time being asked, hey, can you come back and touch up on this? And I thought, holy shit, did I miss something? Am I in trouble? And my attorney and department, they were able to codify that and not have to do it. But little things like that, I don't think people think about in the moment. They're thinking, it's not a big deal. We'll just have them come back and give another statement. It's a big deal to people. You got to put yourself in the shoes of the officer that was in the shooting. And it's something as minor as having them come back for either a follow-up to the interview or conducting a second interview, like you said, I think it's re-traumatizing the officer, and you're making them potentially feel like they did something wrong.
Right.
So why not just do it all in one? Is that how you guys do it, or?
We do it a little bit differently. We will do, so people aren't necessarily, it depends, I guess. So, I mean, there's really no straight answer. But if they don't talk to the criminal realm, then they're going to be forced in to talk and give an admin.
Sure.
So it's still typically one. We're finding more and more people in California aren't really talking. And I'm not encouraging, people out there not to talk to your investigators, but at least talk to your counsel. I'll clear up a few things too. People, I've heard time and time again, it just irks me to death, is go, oh, well, my DA's cool and whatnot, or my chief's got my back, my sergeant has my back, this won't happen to me. And it's like, well, you know, the DOJ investigating you on some shootings and stuff. So it doesn't matter how cool your chief, and despite the fact that when was the last time a chief or your sergeant was consulted, hey, should we put this guy in jail or not? He said, you say he's cool. Oh, if he's cool, if he's popular, let's not put him in jail then.
Yeah.
Your chief doesn't have a say in that. No. So this is where you guys got to know this stuff inside and out.
With all your investigation experience and the people that you communicate and teach across the state and the country, what do you think the percentage is, or if you could kind of talk about people that are voluntarily giving statements and those that are not? What's the numbers on that kind of?
God, I mean, you talk to folks in the middle of the state, and they're like, "Oh, we have a great relationship with our DA. We're always going to give a voluntary statement."
I think it depends where you work.
Yeah,
I really do. Yeah.
And then you got other parts of the state where it's like, I will absolutely under no circumstance give. Yeah. And you know what? They're both right. There's no. I mean, it's whatever works for where you're at. I can't give an opinion either way. I mean, if you got a great relationship, that's great for you. But at the same time, you got to understand where some people don't have that relationship with their district attorney's office, and they are a little bit more guarded as to whether or not they're going to give a statement.
You know what's sad is not only do I think it depends on what state you live in, I think it also comes down to what county what county you're working in. I mean, that's just the hard reality of it. All right, let's talk about, we mentioned the body cam, reviewing body cam footage prior to giving an interview.
Let's throw a grenade in.
Let's do that.
Throw some unpopular opinions in here. And this is why I enjoy, because Marlon, he's a Southern California guy. I'm a Northern California guy. And we might as well be two different countries in the way we...
even Central, you got Central California, right, Northern California, and then Southern California. It is almost like we're like three different states.
Yeah, and really. And I'm not saying this is the right way. It's the way that works for me and my agency, or some other folks. His way works for him and his agency, and what works for other. So this is just an opinion here, but let me kind of back it up where I'm going. So the unpopular opinion that it kind of seemed people want to rip my, and let me clarify too, before doing this, I didn't have these same views. I mean, a lot of the views that I'm sharing right now, I didn't have 5 years ago. And I'd be pissed at myself right now for telling you the things that I'm saying. I'd be saying, oh, you're a traitor and everything, but there's science behind it too. And just seeing these things put in practice, you kind of learn what the best way is. So years ago, I thought, I'm going to watch my body worn camera if I'm in an OIS. I have that right. I'm absolutely going to, I'm going to justify every movement and thing that I did on there. Now, I don't feel that way at all. And
prior to the interview,
correct. So whether it be a criminal interview or an admin, I encourage you not to watch the body worn camera. And the reason for that is, let's throw it out. We're on radio right now, right? Assuming people are listening to this and not watching it on YouTube. Everyone in their mind is kind of picturing what we look like. If you haven't seen us already, you've got this picture of what I look like right now. I told you earlier I had sideburns and stuff. So you have this image in your head of what I look like.
Looks like Rico Suave / Elvis.
Yeah. Elvis from the late 70s.
Oh, geez, Kyle.
But everyone has this image. And now you go on YouTube and you see what I look like. It's hard to bring back that initial image you had in that head. It's now been tainted with what you saw. So the same thing kind of happens with officer-involved shootings. You have an image in your head, and our brains aren't like video recorders. They pick up the important pieces. They can be shuffled around. But at the same time, you did what you did for a reason. And I want that most pure statement. I want the recording that's in your head. A body-worn camera only captures fact. It will never in a million years capture perception. The body-worn camera may have captured something that you weren't even looking at. I want to know what you saw through your eyes. On top of what you saw, I want to know every other sense out there as well. What did you hear? What did you smell? Let's get in the fourth dimension right now. How fast was time going, or did it slow down for you? Mm-hmm. Because if you're telling me you shot, the guy shot at you instantly and now there's a 4-second gap, well, that doesn't kind of jive. So now we find that when people watch the body-worn cameras ahead of time, it doesn't jive with what they saw in their brain. And now they're more on the defensive. Oh, if I would have known that, I would have done this. Oh, if I saw that over there, if I saw that car, I could have used it for cover. But in reality, you didn't see the car at the time. You were tunneled in. So we find that cops start to explain stuff that they had no knowledge about whatsoever. So if I can get the most pure statement from you before it's tainted with the body-worn camera, I want that. I want to know what your perception is. It doesn't have to match. And probably one of the best interviews that I got to see, it was another agency, and I'm listening to the cop talk. He gives a statement as to why he did his series of events. Great statement, everything. After he gave a state of mind statement, the agency let him watch his body-worn camera. He's watching it there. And after watching it, he just flat out says, that video is bullshit and it's lying. And the investigator's like, okay, go on, tell me more about that. And he's not doing it to they corrupted the video. Mm-hmm. It's not what it showed. He's all, I'm telling you, these things happened. I did these things. Even though the video didn't show it, he thought in his mind with stress and everything else that came into play that he did certain things that he actually didn't do. But it's explainable too. I mean, it's totally explainable. And the other thing that I point out too, and this is kind of what swayed me watching that interview, as well as talking to a buddy of mine. And this is years back when I said, cops should be able to watch the body-worn camera. So, okay, you're in an officer-involved shooting, right? You just shot somebody. And you're ready to go into that interview. You know you're a hero. You did the right thing. You wouldn't be alive today if you didn't shoot back. And then before giving your statement, I show you the body-worn camera footage and I slow it down. And on the body-worn camera, I freeze frame a guy pointing a gun right at you, but you see that gun has an orange tip on it. What does that do to your statement? What does that do to your state of mind now?
It's ruined it.
Right.
It makes you doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's going to bring a lot of self-doubt now to your own thought.
Worry, all that.
The only thing you're going to be focusing on is, I didn't know. Had I seen that, I would have. I mean, I've ruined your perception. Mm-hmm. I've absolutely tainted that interview. So that's, again, is it the right way? Are there other ways? I mean, yeah, there's always gonna be different ways. I'm just offering one perspective that I've seen work for cops out there.
I like it though. But I mean, you are a professional. That's what you do. And we've pre-talked before this quite a bit, but I would not watch my body camera after talking with you. And even that, I mean, it's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, you're honestly the first guy that I've probably heard, especially someone that investigates officer-involved shootings, say that. And I think the initial hit is like, you're crazy. And then listening to you describe it, and then visualizing that, I think it does change my perspective as well. And that's the beautiful thing about conversations and debates.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not even debating you on it. I'm just saying that's just something I never would have thought of before. And had somebody just said that and then not backed it up with why, I probably would have said you're crazy. But listening to you describe it, I'm sitting here thinking about it. That's pretty unique. I mean, I don't know that every agency is going to jump on board with that, but I do like the perspective that you offer from it and the way you describe it. How many agencies do you think are doing that now? And do you think, is it a policy thing, or is it just, are you leaving it up to the officer? Hey, we have the body cam footage here that you can watch. It's up to you, or no?
It's all over the place. Some of them are saying, you're not watching it, period. Others are saying, hey, we're going to get a state of mind statement from you. I want to get that pure statement and then I'll let you watch it. Others are saying, go ahead and watch it and we'll talk from there. The one thing that I like kind of, I guess it's the middle ground, is it's not letting you watch it up front. It's not prohibiting you from watching it, period. It's, I want that state of mind statement. We're going to talk and I'm going to get all 5 senses out there, what you saw. Then I'm gonna let you watch the body worn camera. And then I want you to explain everything you did on there. And if it doesn't match up, that's fine. That's not a nail in the coffin for you. I mean, you can't remember everything that you went through in a traumatic experience. For anyone that's been in a car accident, hey, tell me what cars were driving by. Tell me how many times your car spun around. Tell me what the first thing the driver of the other car said to you. Tell me the license plate.
Yeah, impossible.
You can't. And that's not even that traumatic of an experience, but yet we're asking our cops to be 100% right there and explain. No, there's going to be difference between memory and video. And that's good because that's how the brain works. And that's perception. And I will never be able to tell you what you perceived. A video can only show me facts, but facts and perception can be 2 different things.
Yeah, totally true. And what's the reality is before body cams came out, cops you had to rely on that.
Right.
You had to rely on their perception and their statement only. So that's interesting. I mean, their body cameras have only been around for 10 years, do you think, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these agencies just adopted. I mean, there's a huge amount that have just done it in the past 8 years. 2015 kind of seems to be the number where agencies have taken them up.
My agency, we've only just had them for just over a year.
Some agencies still don't have them.
Right.
Yeah, some don't even have them. So now maybe investigators are relying way too heavily on the body camera footage when getting the officer statement. Now I'm kind of curious, like, do you think the investigator should be watching the video footage before giving the interview? Or do you think as the investigator, you should watch it after the fact?
I think beforehand, because you got to have a basis of questioning, you got to go, but at the same time, what's different is, me as an investigator, I'm not so worried about facts as I am perception, because a body worn camera just shows the direction that the body was facing. I don't see what was all around him. I don't know which direction the head was tilted. So, I mean, like I said earlier, it just captured the facts of the event. But what was the buildup to it? I mean, before it was buffering for 30 seconds, what happened?
Yeah.
Has this cop ever gone and dealt with this subject before? What information did that cop have in his brain? What was going on specifically in the cop's brain today that led to this encounter and all this? So perception plays huge.
Well, I'm just curious, like what is the camera footage, the body cam footage, is that influencing investigators though too in their decision prior to even doing the interview? I mean, I don't know. Like you can't sit there and say like, I don't think it is. I think it is influencing them in some way.
Well, 100% it's going to, because if you don't have that, you only have, if that investigator walked the scene, they only have a standardization of questions. It's like you questioning a criminal, into a simple domestic violence. Like, you're trying to ask these questions to paint this picture that you're trying to visualize, and they're painting it for you. And it's going to be Swiss cheese because you're not going to ask some of the right questions. That's why some interviews are really, really long. But then if you, as an investigator, you watch that camera and you're like, okay, I have a good visual of what happened. Now I know how to question and what direction to go.
Yeah.
I think it's almost beneficial to watch it.
And this is where I drive it home and put it back on the listeners out here. Why would you assume competence in anyone else other than yourself?
When your freedom is at stake.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah, I mean, I've heard you talk about horror stories, and we'll share a couple more, but heard a story of an attorney, your attorney falling asleep in an interview.
Oh,
when you're giving it, guess what? If
I'd be like, hey, you're fired. You're done. You can leave now.
Right. And but cops don't realize they have that power to do that.
Well, also some with attorneys, you're provided attorney and you're just hoping that attorney is the greatest one. But if you were involved in something in your personal life, you would vet out some attorneys. You do some research. You talk to some people.
Nobody does that. Nobody does that though.
No, not at all.
They should, but and they don't. And that's it. You just hit it on the head. Was you feel like you work for them? No,
right.
They work for you. You pay your union dues, or you're paying for that person to be there. You can at any time release them from your case and ask for a new attorney.
If that happened to me today, I would have a conversation with that attorney, and I would ask some questions to that attorney. How many of these have you done? How many interviews have you conducted? How many officer involved shootings have you walked? I would ask some questions to get a basis of who they are, because maybe you don't mesh with that person. Maybe you're like, I don't really like this person. I want another one. I think that's the one thing. And the more we talk, the more we discover. And that's why I really like this podcast, because we're building and creating and helping people make better decisions. And this is part of that. But you're relying everything on that. And that is the thing, the negative part of law enforcement is everything is so robotic and it's not fluid and not a lot of change. And I think we're trying to make that change. But yes, you are in control.
Yeah, you
find the attorney that represents you, your freedom, you've got to ask questions.
Well, at the end of the day, if you go to jail, guess what? Your attorney still got paid.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've heard some crazy stories out there with guys that are being represented by some of these attorneys. And I'm like, holy shit. Like my story is minor compared to what I've heard with some other guys.
Well, even just people have told me, the investigator asked, oh, what'd you do to prep? Well, me and my attorney met in the hallway 15 minutes before walking in the interview.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's
okay.
scary.
I've had more prep for a deposition.
Exactly.
My DA for an assault case, you're testifying for.
Yeah.
This has been super informative. I like the subject of body cams. We need to have you on as a guest. Kyle and I, if you guys did not know, we just started a Patreon account where we do live interactive content and we do a lot of body cam breakdowns. And I think that is awesome. Where we could really, really bridge the gap and provide some really good education. So check out Shots Fired Podcast, the Patreon account.
Yeah. Yeah. My wheels are kind of spinning with this whole body cam now.
We've got to have you on that as a guest. I think the viewers would really enjoy that.
So, hey, James, is there anything else you can add or that you want to add about?
I'd love to pick your guys' brain. And it's one of the things that Marlon and I started doing in our IA officer involved shooting class is we ask for, because I can only represent one side of it. I can only show you the investigative side, but I'm always learning as well. I'm not here to say I know it all or this is the right way. Every one I've done, I've learned something different on. So you guys have both been in officer involved shootings and I kind of want to bring it back to you guys to, if you're willing to share, I mean, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but is there something that through the investigative process from right after you shot that a supervisor or someone that you work with, whoever it was that either did something that you really appreciated or that you actually despise and hope nothing like that ever happens to anyone else ever again?
I do have a story. I have a story that stands out to me that I implemented change throughout our department because it happened and I spoke up. But you want to go first?
Yeah.
Do you have anything?
Yeah, I do. I have a really good and a really bad. They're both fairly short. The really good was when I was on SWAT, I was involved in my shooting, and my lieutenant, Winnie Brown, this happened on a Friday night. She was off work at home, and my SWAT sergeant, Lightfoot, who we've had on here, was also at home. As soon as they heard about it, I mean, I imagine they heard within minutes, both of them stopped what they were doing, got in their car and drove down to support me. And they were my supervisor and lieutenant, direct in command. And that was so impactful in a great positive way for me because that's who I worked for. And they were there to support me the entire time. I guarantee they were probably more tired than I was, but they stayed by me the whole time. Some of them didn't quite ask questions. They knew I was hungry. They brought me food. I don't want to ask or answer questions. They brought me stuff. And if I ate it, that was on me. If I didn't, they didn't care, but they always brought stuff and they just managed that really well. So I think showing up and being there to support as a friend was really, really impactful. The thing I did not like is after the fact, everything was done a few months later when Internal Affairs concluded their investigation, which I was within policy. The person in charge of Internal Affairs just walked into my office, delivered the letter on my keyboard in my office when I wasn't there and I was out doing something. And then I came back in and I saw a letter sitting there. I was like, oh, what's this? And I opened it and it was my letter that said I was within policy. And I was mortified and absolutely pissed by that because that is a major, major incident that I experienced. And the department is going to tell me I'm in policy by dropping a letter on my desk. And since then, I mean, I talked to my sergeant and the lieutenant, and they were mortified by it too. They didn't know that person was coming in, and if they had control of that, that never would have happened. But that was a major gap. Internal Affairs came in, just dumped it, and left. I didn't like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's something that should be probably, and I don't know how you guys do it. And I think the bigger the department gets, I could see that being more of like a streamlined thing, but definitely smaller, medium-sized agencies, I think that should be delivered to you. And hey, you're being cleared of this, whether it's from the chief, captain, or somebody of rank.
I do have one other quick funny thing to add though. That was good.
You just cut me off. I was going to go.
Yeah, but this is going to be funny. This is funny. I haven't even, very few people I've ever shared this with, but at the time I was in SWAT and I had my take-home car, and my wife and my brother had come down to support. He drove her down, and then when I was going to leave, it'd been almost 20 something hours. I was exhausted, and I was like, hey, I can't drive. Like my brother, he's got to drive me home. And they're like, you want him to drive your take home? I'm like, yeah. So my brother actually drove my take home car home for me. And after
the lights on?
Yeah.
I'm not going to answer that one, but it's pretty funny because he's never driven anything like that. And he drove me home. And I don't think that would ever happen, except again, my sergeant and lieutenant were great people and allowed that.
Yeah. Good leadership prevails.
All right. Well, I cut you off, so go.
Yeah, that was rude. So something that stands out to me, I'll reiterate what you said, and that is the friends that connect with you. I'm in K9 or was in K9 for my shootings, and every time you got K9 guys reaching out to you, your good friends asking to take your dog, like that stuff's all good and supportive, and I do agree with you on that. Something that stood out to me that I don't want to say it was traumatizing, but it made me feel very uncomfortable. And that is when I was giving my interview, they brought me into this room where they do interviews with they call them safe interviews with like children and whatever. It's a different room other than the room that they interrogate suspects in, to not make me feel like a suspect. So I appreciate that. The problem is when I go in there and I sit down on this, and I remember this vividly, it was a couch, and it was a smaller couch with really soft cushions. I think it was for kids. And I sit down in this couch and I kind of sink into it. And I'm like,
oh gosh.
And then the investigators are sitting in their chairs in front of me and they're sitting way higher than me. And so I'm looking up at them, sunk down into this couch. I was so uncomfortable. And after the interview, actually, you know what? Before, I can't remember if it had even started and I said something, or maybe halfway through I stopped it. And I told him, I'm not doing this in this couch anymore. It's making me feel so uncomfortable. They completely took the couch out, brought in actual chairs for me to sit in. And then ever since then, that thing is gone, and they still do interviews in that room. But they've swapped it out with actual nice professional office style, chairs, cushion chairs, whatever. And I know this sounds kind of dumb, but something as minor as that, has stuck with me forever. Until this day, I can vividly picture that in my mind, just making me feel I can't even put my finger on it, what it made me feel like, but it was not less than, almost I guess I felt like a kid or something. It was just weird.
That's how I'm picturing you in one of those play school little couches and everything. This giant grown man in a children's tea party set.
It was so weird.
You are like a kid. They're trying to make you comfortable. That's why.
That's true.
What was the coloring book for though?
Yeah. They're
his
here,
nerves.
Take these markers, and they're you need to stay in between the lines. Right. No, I get it. I totally get what they were trying to do, and they were trying to bring the environment down for me. But I don't know, something little like that, can affect somebody. I told you on the phone, we were chatting yesterday, and I'm not going to say where, but I was teaching at a class, and this guy came up to me during a break, and he was like, hey, can I tell you something? And we were talking about, what we were discussing earlier on the show and what to do with officers after they've been in the shooting. And he's like, hey, I was in this shooting, a total righteous shooting, him and a guy, dude shooting at him. They're out in the woods. And after this concluded, they took their weapons and then made them go sit on a log in the crime, or just outside the crime scene for 4 hours outside by themselves while the detectives were out there doing their thing before they brought him back to the PD. Completely demoralized the guy. It crushed him, and he got teary-eyed about it, because he felt like they just forgot about him, and he felt like he got treated like shit.
He did.
He absolutely did. And it angered me that he told me that. And I've heard stories of that happening time and time again. And then I try to put myself in the shoes of the investigators or the lieutenant or whoever's running the show. And I know they have a million things going on, and there's a lot involved in those, but I wish people could take the time to just make sure that the officer that's involved in those is well taken care of before moving on to the next step. Don't overlook that, because you could be traumatizing that person for the rest of their life. And that may be the one thing that they remember of the whole event that affects them the most, is how they were treated after the fact. So I don't know if hopefully that answers your question, but
you know,
little things.
We hear those, and I think that's why I kind of asked you guys. I like hearing because it's stuff that I would have never even thought of, and I'm sure your listeners, if you got supervisors out there, these things are huge. I mean, this is the takeaway for it. The big things that we think are big, it's not often that sticks with you, whether it be good or bad, but it's the little things that go overlooked. So I'm glad we had that conversation. And, you know, I've heard common sense prevails. I think that's probably the big takeaway for anyone listening to this right now is, you know, one guy came up to me after a class. He's all, I had to wait almost 4 hours covered in blood for CSI to come out and take pictures of me in my uniform.
Yeah.
What is this thing called a phone now with a camera in it, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I think
It's the oversight.
leave comments in the comments section of your recommendations of what you've experienced that's good and what's bad, because the best way to learn is to share information.
Yeah.
And then, you know, just for the other thing too, which I hear all across the state and even some parts of the country, is just, you know, for the investigative process for departments out there, if you can let the cops know updates, I mean, you're not telling them what direction it's going in, but hey, this case is done. It's been submitted to your chief or sheriff right now. You know, I finished my admin investigation. Let them know the next steps. And you guys brought it up. I mean, I love it. Checking in with your peers. It doesn't stop that first week. I mean, you guys are still reliving this, talking about it right now. And check in with people as the years go on. Hey, you want to go out and grab a beer? You want to talk about anything? Follow up with these folks.
Yeah. A lot of people think too, when you're on admin leave, you can't speak to those people. And that is just, that's completely not true. You can't talk about the incident, but you can surely talk to your friends, and life can go on as normal as possible for them. Just don't talk about the incident. You know,
Right.
They're not untouchable. Don't alienate them.
Yeah. Treat it. I mean, couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah. That's what cops get so scared and go, oh, he can't talk. No, he can't talk about the incident. He can still talk. He's still funny. Talk to him about Vegas, or maybe not. That might actually be worse than the OIS, but talk about sports, do whatever, go catch a game.
Yeah. I just see guys and gals getting alienated once they're put out on admin leave. So that's a myth.
Well, this section has been really valuable.
Yeah, we could sit here and talk forever on this topic. The idea, hopefully, you guys, was to give you kind of an inside look of what to expect during, or if you're involved in a shooting, God forbid. And then I would really start diving into your guys' departments, ask your detectives, whoever investigates them, what do they do? What do they look for? I mean, when is your interview going to be? I mean, all those little things. You don't want to be trying to figure that out immediately following the incident, because you're going to be way stressed out at that time. So great conversation. James, thank you for, again, taking the time to drive down here. Let's plug in Savage Training Group, where you guys got classes next. You guys can head over to savagetraininggroup.com and check out their website. He's got a whole list of classes on there you guys can pre-register for. You guys are all over the place. So what's next?
Right. So I do 2 classes. The first one falls under the negotiation realm, and that's the modern crisis negotiations. And, you know, I hate to say it, but I got to go to Florida next week and teach a class out there. I'm really upset about that. So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like in the 90s out there. This is not going to be fun at all. So
you got to leave California.
A lot of seaweed, a lot of seaweed analogy right now in the water.
Right. I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah. Bars all around, beaches. Yeah. So somehow I'll make do. Oh, there's a class out there too. I forgot to, I'm getting distracted, but we're doing Fort Pierce out there for the modern crisis negotiations. And we also have one early May in Huntington Beach, another, somehow I'll manage place out there. Yeah. So we're doing those 2. And then Marlon and I, we put on our IA internal affairs. Basically, we will walk you through the first day of how to do an internal affairs investigation. This goes for basically street level sergeants to supervisors. And then we build upon it the second day with, now you've been presented with an officer involved shooting. How do you investigate this in-house? And we're doing that in Menifee, California, early June. So
nice.
That one's just called the IA-OIS class.
Very cool.
And then people always wonder too, oh, do I have to be a negotiator to come into this? And it's like, no, anyone patrol level, we love to have you. We've even had dispatchers come in to our negotiations class because,
That's smart.
It's just so funny, the different kind of people that come in with different experiences. And we don't lecture. It's a very interactive class, kind of like it is here. We just like to talk. We share stories. We share our stories. We have the students share theirs. It's just a big group kind of think tank there going, and hey, what's worked, what doesn't, and how can we improve it going forward for the greater good?
Yeah. And I've been to some Savage training group classes. They are top notch. The instructors are top notch. I have not spoke to one person who's been to these classes who's walked away disappointed. So make sure you guys go check it out. Again, savagetraininggroup.com. Go follow him on social media. He's constantly putting out quality, good information, even on Instagram, Facebook, his LinkedIn account. It's all there. So go check him out.
And if you have not signed up for our email distribution list, go to shotsfiredpodcast.org and sign up, where you'll get exclusive content. And then make sure you check out our Patreon account.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap this one up. Thank you again, James. That was good. Good conversation. We'll catch you guys on the next video, and stay safe.
Keep moving forward.
Later.
Thanks, guys.